And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will proceed into our second panel discussion. Once again, if you would like to post any questions, you may use the Q&A function in the session 2 on the agenda in the ACES app. Now, in a world where geopolitical shifts and policy changes can rapidly derail progress, how do we build energy partnerships that last? How do we ensure that projects powering millions of lives today remain secure tomorrow? This panel brings together the architects of successful cross-border initiatives, leaders who have navigated complex national agendas and delivered real results. Together, they will unpack how innovative partnerships, technology solutions, and financial mechanisms can create resilient energy corridors that withstand political change. It is now my pleasure to invite on stage the following panelists. Please help me welcome Mr. James Laybourn, Regional Segment Director, DNV Energy Systems, APAC. Mr. Birribi Dillon, Head of International Partnerships and Development, Institutional Export Finance, Australia. Mr. Paul Butarbutar, Head, Just Energy Transition Partnership. Mr. Lim Mingcheng, First Vice Chair, Data Center Chapter, SGTech. And Mr. Mitesh Patel, Chief Operating Officer, SunCable. And I would now like to invite our moderator, Ms. Azlin Ahmad, Managing Editor, Argus Media, on stage to moderate this panel discussion. Over to you, Ms. Azlin.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our panel on powering through partnerships, building cross-border energy corridors in uncertain times. Right. As we know, building cross-border clean energy corridors in Asia presents significant successes as well as ongoing challenges as the region aims to meet rising energy demand and decarbonization targets. Several projects are underway or in advanced planning stages. The ASEAN Power Grid, as we heard earlier, is a key cross-border initiative aiming for interconnected grid by 2045 to facilitate low-carbon electricity sharing. But the region does face significant financing gaps and requires substantial upfront investments for smart grids and expanded transmission lines. Regional cooperation and strong governance frameworks are necessary to ensure costs and benefits are evenly distributed among the countries. Today, we have an exceptional lineup of experts who will discuss these issues from the perspective of technology, finance, policy, and project development. Before we dive in, I'd like to introduce our panelists a bit more in detail. James Laybourn, Regional Segment Director of DNV Energy Systems, the expert in risk management and technical assurance. Beside him, Birribi Dillon, Head of International Partnerships and Developments, Institutional at Export Finance Australia, specializing in financing large-scale infrastructure projects. We have Paul Butarbutar, Head of Just Energy Transition Partnership Secretariat, who has deep insights into policy and regional integration. Lim Mingcheng, First Vice Chair, Data Center Chapter of SGTech, and Singapore Country Head for ST Telemedia Global Data Centers, representing the data centers industry, a key off-taker industry, and keen to find collaborative solutions to support both Singapore and the region's growing digital economies. And Mitesh Patel, Chief Operating Officer at SunCable, which is leading one of the most ambitious renewable energy projects connecting Australia to Asia. So, let's start by framing the discussion. I'd like to ask a question to all my panelists, briefly, in an era of geopolitical uncertainty, climate risk, and rapid technological change, what do you feel is the most critical factor for building resilient cross-border energy corridors, and why? Maybe we can start with James, since you're the yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the question. So, I think you already mentioned just now the most important factor that we see, the most critical factor, is about harmonized standards, and it's harmonized standards linked to whole system thinking. It's not just about building individual infrastructure items. It's about building infrastructure coupled, looking at the whole industry need, regulating and developing it in a coupled and sustainable way across the whole value chain, covering multiple markets, covering multiple technologies, and multiple segments. What we've seen in recent times is in markets in China, in the US, in Europe, is that there have been a number of projects developed in silos, looking at the renewables market, looking at the power grids, the gas markets. They've been developed in silos, and this has led to systemic risks and potentially critical failures. In China, what we saw is that developing offshore wind, the wind in silos led to a huge overcapacity and challenges with wasting up to 40% of their wind in provinces until they had market and policy alignment. What we saw in the US, in Texas, is the fact that the power grids and the gas grids were developed in isolation without common standards led to was a key contributor to the blackouts that occurred there. And then what we saw in Europe and Germany is developing renewables in isolation has led to lots of problems because of a lack of common policy. So for us as DNV, one of the most common challenges we see with our customers that coming to talk to us about is, first of all, understanding what are the policies and standards today in particular markets. For example, what are the attribute claims that will be accepted for hydrogen in particular markets? What are the requirements for power grids in particular markets? And then secondly, uncertainty about how these will develop into the future. So essentially, without common harmonized standards, it's going to be next to impossible to develop these interconnected cross-border power grids or other energy corridors, regardless of how much investment we put in.
Birribi.
Thanks. So I'll approach the question as a financier. I think the challenge here is of immense scale in terms of sourcing the capital for a range of potential projects that may, for example, contribute to the ASEAN power grid. These individual projects are each very complicated, complex in terms of their risk profile separately. The challenge from my perspective is to ensure that we have government policy alignment and regulatory frameworks that are in place that enable efficient financing structures for that capital to flow. Where there are risks that aren't dealt with properly, then you might find that private capital will not take that risk and will not finance those projects. So it's also important to find parties like governments and other multilaterals, for example, who may be able to provide support within those risk profiles to ensure that the projects become bankable and the capital ultimately flows to support their development.
Paul?
Yeah, I will use my point of view from Indonesian perspective. So as you know, we are let's say island states, right? So with that, we have a lot of grids, not a single grid interconnected to each other, but thinking about, for example, in Kalimantan, even we don't have any single grid. So thinking about how to, let's say, provide electricity to all of these grids at the same quality, and thinking about, let's say, area in eastern part of Indonesia where we don't have actually a proper transmission, and a lot of villages actually not properly electrified, and this becomes an issue for us in Indonesia. So this will be the biggest challenge for us actually when we talk about, let's say, how to provide a proper, let's say, resilience in the energy sector.
Mingcheng, any thoughts about
Hi,
that?
good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah.
So when you talk about cross-energy borders, I like to frame it more, given we are in Singapore and I think more specifically ASEAN. So I think that's where I would like to focus when I talk about cross-energy borders per se. And I think recently there's a lot of talk about the ASEAN power grid. So ASEAN, as of 2 days ago, now has 11 member states. There are many different language, many different cultures per se, all very different. And that has in turn led to, similar to what James and Birribi has mentioned, I think there's some commonality that is that that leads to varying policies and standards. So as such, for myself, I also agree with them that I think one of the critical factor would be to align the varying policies and standards across all the countries and also have framework to do so. I think this morning also Minister Gan has also shared there are some frameworks in place that's been announced to do so. So I think by doing this, we'll help to promote clear and common understanding, not only across the governments, but I think also for the industries as well. And then this will then help to accelerate scalable developments of such cross-border energy corridors. So that's my take on it. Thanks.
And Mitesh.
Yep. Good afternoon and pleasure to be here. I think those who are not familiar with SunCable, I'll just introduce the project here. We are developing a project to bring 1.75 gigawatt of AC energy from Australia to Singapore. It's quite a massive interconnector project. My comments will be obviously in that context. There are a couple of things that we think can accelerate the progress of interconnector projects that are coming to Singapore and broader ASEAN region. One is political alignment and political will. I think that's the biggest roadblock at least from our perspective. There are multiple jurisdictions through which our cable, and for that matter, the other projects will also have to pass through. And it is essential that there is a certain level of agreement on how that needs to be done, the regulation and so on. The second part is the risk sharing. So when you have uncertainty, the risk goes up. And as the risk goes up, you need to rethink about your traditional risk framework and then see what is the best way to share this risk. And this risk is not only among the B2B players, but also between the governments, between the public and private parties. So comprehensively looking at how the risk is mapped and shared rightfully among the partners that can deal the risk in the best manner.
Thank you all for your insights. I'd like to go just a little bit deeper into where your expertise are. I will start off with James. James, DNV's ASEAN Interconnector study suggests that regional cooperation, which envisages full, unconstrained resource sharing between countries, could cut as much as 800 billion from the overall net present cost of ASEAN decarbonization by 2050, as compared with the individual approach, whereby countries try to fully decarbonize alone from their own resources. So my question is, how then now can ASEAN countries move from concept to execution on large-scale interconnectors, hydrogen networks?
Thanks. So I think the development of the interconnectors, it depends on, first of all, pilots demonstrating the value and how these developments can be built. Secondly, it's about the common standards that we've already touched upon. And then thirdly, and probably most importantly, it's about trust. Trust between governments, trust from policymakers, but also the wider stakeholders within communities, that they can depend upon power, they can depend upon resources coming from their neighbors, that they're happy to share their resources with neighbors. So we developed that white paper off the back of a lot of discussions with the major utilities spread around the region. When we talked to the utilities, there were two major issues that were being brought up in a lot of the discussions. The first was really about the quantification of the value of interconnectors. Like, why should I bother? What's in it for me? So hence that whole calculation of if each market develops in isolation, it's going to cost so much to develop, and you're going to be using potentially less efficient resources in country, and you'll also need a lot more battery storage, a lot more technology to balance your grid. Whereas if you share those resources, you can potentially save more than 10%. Around this $800 billion figure was coming out of that. So that was really about showing the value. The second point was really about what are credible, realistic steps that we can take? You know, it's like one thing to say we want this fully interconnected grid, but to get there is going to take a lot of steps from a lot of different teams and stakeholders. So what are those? There were a lot of different action items, but the three most common groups, first of all, it was about pilots. So this is where the LTMS PIP, the interconnector with Laos and Malaysia, has been so vital at demonstrating the credibility, the value that these interconnectors can bring, and that the technology is viable, etc. The second point is around the harmonization of the standards, but also about the de-risking of these projects. So here, it's about technical standards, where we're talking about things like grid codes, the agreements for selling the power. It's also about the ownership rights and how investors, if they invest in a country, can be sure of the long-term value from their investments. And then the third point is really about the resources in the region. So what we see today is that we don't necessarily have full supply chains that are built out in the region. We don't have the ability to manufacture a lot of this stuff in region. And also we don't have the human capital within region. I think this plays very closely with what the Minister was, the Minister of State was saying this morning about the importance of building human capital to support the rollout of these technologies. So those were sort of three broad brush approaches, but you know, they all interconnect to support the rollout of these interconnected projects.
You did mention earlier about policy standards and harmonization. Is there something that you would like to elaborate a little bit more about on that, on how we can go towards that in ASEAN?
An example that's more from the hydrogen side of things, but what we've basically seen is attribute claims. What really is counted as low carbon in different countries varies widely. So when you're talking to an investor about building a facility for producing green ammonia or methanol or SAF or whatever, and you want to sell it to another country, you need to have confidence that what you're selling is fit for purpose, that you're not going to be either overly investing in making it too pure, reducing the carbon intensity too much, which is expensive, or on the other hand, not meeting the requirements of that country. And I think we've seen a lot of pushback from different nations on, yeah, this carbon attribute is not acceptable to us. So I think having that common understanding on attribute claims is going to be vital, and the same for green electrons. We need that common standardization between countries.
So there needs to be a lot of communications, I guess, between the countries, the governments, about what the standards are. Okay, yes. I'd like to go to just Paul. I mean, with on the policy side. So under the Just Energy Transition Partnership, JETP, Indonesia is aiming to have renewable energy constitute about 30% of your energy mix by 2030. Could you tell us, cross-border collaboration, how could this speed up the transition and still maintain energy security for Indonesia and keep energy affordable for the Indonesian people?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So let's say the JETP scenario that we have developed back in 2023 with 44% of our renewable share, we actually put that for on-grid, means connected with the PLN grid. So as you know, that currently actually we import already some of the renewable from Malaysia that go to Kalimantan. It's already for a few years. And in fact, that Kalimantan is one of the islands with, let's say, very much relying on fossil so far. Of course, if we could get more renewable from Malaysia, that would be good as well. And although we have actually huge potential for hydro in Kalimantan, so there is now target to develop a lot of renewable in Kalimantan. So later on, it might be actually at the end that if we build all the renewable potential in Kalimantan, that we could export that to Malaysia or other countries. That's first. But one of the let's say the potential that has not been actually mentioned in the document in 2023 is looking at the captive power. So as you know that we have developed a lot of smelters, nickel and bauxite and so on. We just, let's say, released the draft report about the captive, and to date we have about 24 giga of fossil in let's say industrial area. About almost 20 giga is actually a coal power plant, and if we would be able to, let's say, develop, let's say, more renewable supplying to this industrial state, that could be actually a good options. Then that's the good opportunity for cross-border, let's say, renewable energy that could, let's say, evacuate the energy to this industrial complex. So we had a discussion with Mitesh before. If, for example, the energy from Australia that they plan to develop would go to this industrial complex, that would be a good way for us to decarbonize our industrial complex. So it will help us actually not on the 44% part, but actually in reducing or decarbonize our industry in more broader sense. It will be more, let's say, beneficial for us rather than focusing on the 44%, because the 44% let's say, includes actually phasing out coal power plant and so on, but it would not happen because no one actually would be willing to finance that. So most probably the 44% will not be met, but yeah, let's see. So, but should focus on the industrial estate.
So from what you say, I mean, would it need urgent policy reforms in Indonesia to achieve what you envisage? Do you feel that there are policy reforms that are most urgent to coordinate Indonesia's energy transition with regional power trade?
Yeah, what is missing so far in Indonesia actually how to share the grid. So as you may know that we actually don't have a kind of power wheeling regulation, and there is strong opposition to such kind of regulation. But let's say a regulation related to using of the grid, be it for the export as well as for import of the energy, will be, let's say, will be needed. As a fact, now actually Minister of Energy is looking at the regulation for exporting, using the grid to export energy to Singapore. But once the regulation is done, I think it would enable as well regulating how to import or how to facilitate the export of energy from, let's say, Australia to Singapore or to other country. But sharing benefit sharing will be one of the key aspects of the regulatory framework that need to be well discussed.
Well, that's a nice segue into Mitesh. Mitesh, SunCable is pioneering one of the largest renewable energy projects in the region. The Australia-Asia Power Link project spans multiple jurisdictions, thousands of kilometers, as it aims to supply solar power from northern Australia to Singapore via subsea cable. Could you give us an update on the status of the project and what lessons you can offer for building resilient cross-border energy infrastructure in the current uncertain times of geopolitics, policy reserve, external shifts?
Thank you. Yeah, so I would like to think that probably our project was one of the first to get off the block when it came to interconnected projects. We started out in 2021. Since then, we have made substantial progress. Starting from the site, we have secured land options and land for the generation site. Beyond that, we also have secure right-of-way for the transmission line that is required from the generation site to Darwin. We have received environmental approval, which is one of the biggest environmental approval given probably for any large project in Australia. That includes the subsea area through which we have to lay our cable in Australia. Within Australia, we have also received investment-ready status from Infrastructure Australia. Moving beyond, we have completed about 70% of our subsea survey work. That is right through Australian waters, Indonesian waters. Singapore is only 50 kilometers, and much of it is already surveyed, so not to survey that much. The remaining 30%, we have got permit from Indonesian government to go out and carry out the remaining survey. And then finally, of course, we have received conditional approval from EMA. Beyond that, within Singapore market, we have also mapped about 3 gigawatt of offtake interest for our project. And at one point, we went out and negotiated 15 PPAs. And then since then, things have changed with respect to the entire interconnected projects. So we have made substantial progress. Currently, we are going through capital raise process, and we hope to conclude that in next couple of months. In terms of lessons, I would distill all our learnings into probably 2 areas. One is all related to time, and the other one is about scale. When we think of large project, we always think time is our friend. The more time we have, the better it is. You can manage the risk. You can do things sequentially, slowly, and milestone-based approach as we do typically with the project development. But we realize that time is not necessarily your friend, because the more time you have to develop and build these projects, the more macro situations you have to deal with. So when we started out, there was no shortage of 525 kV cable, an XLP cable. Then happened the Russia-Ukraine war, and suddenly now cable supply is 5 to 7 years lead procurement. So that is one example. The second example is the interest rate. When we started this project, interest rates were quite low. They've gone up. Now they're going down. Probably by the time we achieve financial close, they will go back up again. So we would have gone through complete 2 cycles. Same with the political dispensation. The administrations change. Singapore government has changed, but obviously we still have the same administration. But in Indonesia, the government changed, the Australia government changed. So you build relationship, you advocate for the project, and then you see that the changes not only in who is in the government, but also how the administration is structured. So that's one part of it. What that means is we have to continuously think, how can we compress the time of development? If I give another example on the offtake side, we have to go out and sign offtakes that are at least 10 to 12 years out in time frame. There are very few companies who would want to go to their procurement boards or corporate boards to go and say, look, the smartest thing to do is sign large value energy procurement that is 10 or 12 years out. Until you sign those contracts, you can't really go and secure a cable supply, which is the single largest procurement item for us. And that creates a kind of catch-22 situation where you don't have offtake, you can't place your procurement orders, and you can't have procurement orders. You don't place them, you can't really go and sign committed offtake agreements. The second item is scale for us. Our scale is quite big, and I believe that scale, while ours is exceptionally big, all other long-distance interconnectors will have similar challenges. And that is just because of the amount of cable required. We have approximately global supply of 1 year as our need for our cable, 525 kV XLP. How do you solve that kind of challenges? The second is just the size of the capex required. So when you go to ECAs, for example, most of the ECAs will run out their single project credit line. So that's the project caps or thresholds. You go to lenders. Many lenders do not accept this kind of. So you need to go for syndicate, lenders syndicate, banks that are syndicating the loan. Insurance, similar issue. They don't want to take single project exposure of such a large nature. So we're trying to come up with innovative solutions, break it down to smaller project segments, and see how we can deal with this kind of challenges. And the last one I would add is that you need a tremendous amount of resilience to continue on with this kind of challenges and a long horizon of project.
So in light of that, do you think that industry and governments do need to maintain momentum? Is there any suggestions or you would have for them to keep on going?
I think I would like to share something that we discussed at ASEAN Interconnector Forum a few weeks back. I think the entire ecosystem or all the stakeholders within the ecosystem have to think of themselves as a single team. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of jostling about the benefits, risk sharing, and so on. But whether it is government stakeholders, whether it is financiers, equity investors, suppliers, the challenges are humongous. The scale is quite large. Pretty much new for everyone, at least in this region. This has never been done before. And unless we take a unified approach where we are all in this together to solve this issue, we will continue to struggle to bring a lot of these projects to fruition.
Okay. Well, the one thing you did say was the money in the project. And so I'd like to go to Birribi. So obviously, money is a big part. The financing is often the make or break factor for large-scale clean energy corridors. So, and I'm sure you get asked this quite a lot, what innovative financing models or risk-sharing mechanisms can make these projects bankable in volatile times?
Sure, it is an important question. First of all, I'll just provide a quick intro to Export Finance Australia and how we fit into potential financing of these projects. So we are the Australian Government's export credit agency. We can provide loans, guarantees, bonds and other finance solutions under our Indo-Pacific infrastructure mandate, which doesn't actually require Australian content. It just needs to satisfy an Australian benefit test. We also have a $2 billion Southeast Asian investment financing facility that we administer. It's decisioned on behalf of the Australian Government. The point being that we have a wide range of tools to adapt to the innovative financing structures that are required for these projects to proceed. The starting point for any financing of a major project is generally a project finance structure. Project finance structures generally involve different counterparties taking different kinds of risk. Construction EPC contractors taking construction risk. Transmission network providers can provide or can take the connection risk and transmission risk, and off-takers can take the off-take risk. The problem we have is that project finance structures aren't always perfect at successfully delivering projects that have unusual risk profiles. And these projects are very complex. They have very unusual elements of risk, and sometimes a project finance structure won't get us all the way there. So the other alternatives to a project sponsor are to finance a project on balance sheet with corporate debt, but taking on multi-billion dollars worth of corporate debt is often unpalatable for project developers. In the absence of corporate debt, there are some other structures which can be helpful. Blended finance is an interesting and somewhat new tool, certainly to Export Finance Australia. We recently financed a FAST-P initiative, which is sponsored by the Singapore government with Pentagreen. And we've also financed the PIDGE EAAIF fund, both of which have blended finance structures. Blended finance involves catalytic capital taking first loss risk for unusual risks that the market may not be prepared to bank. So that can be a tool to address transaction risk profiles which are challenging to bank. Separately, ECAs, Export Finance Australia is the Australian Government's ECA. It's very common for ECAs to provide guarantee tranches to commercial debt providers. So a commercial bank can lend under an ECA-covered guarantee, for example, and that can help to mitigate risk for the commercial debt providers who provide the underlying capital. So there's an important role for ECAs, both with untied mandates like Export Finance Australia, but also their other ECAs who may perhaps have a tied mandate. The challenge for the sponsor is that they need to consider what content a particular export credit agency might require for them to participate in the project. So it becomes a complex puzzle trying to put the pieces together, choosing the right content and equipment versus trying to fill your capital requirement versus trying to get an efficient cost of debt and other factors in the overall project solution. And then finally, that's where, at the end of the day, there's a role for governments and for multilaterals, perhaps, to provide some kind of backstop risk where the market is not able to structure to address those risks. And certainly it's a question for the governments involved to provide or to consider the support that they might want to provide against the policy benefits from seeing these types of projects going ahead. But at the end of the day, for the capital to flow from the private sector, generally it needs to look like a market standard risk profile for that to happen.
Do you think that export credit agencies regionally collaborate enough? Is there any way that they can collaborate regionally to de-risk projects, attract private capital? Have any thoughts about that?
Yes, so I think these cross-border projects, they deliver benefits to local communities, but they also provide regional benefits to the countries involved. And I think the ASEAN Power Grids development clearly will provide benefits to all countries within ASEAN. So cooperation can happen at the project level, but it can also happen between countries at the finance level. ECAs can work together. Certainly Export Finance Australia likes to work with our partners in the region. That includes other ECAs, but also multilaterals like the ADB and the IFC. Where we can do that to support infrastructure development in the region under our Indo-Pacific infrastructure mandate, then certainly that's attractive to an organisation like EFA. Again, the problem is that other ECAs they tend to have tied mandates, not all of them, but many of them. And the challenge arises again in terms of trying to put that puzzle together and for sponsors to get the relative priorities aligned and properly weighed to get a financing solution that works. But what I would say is where you do have an ECA or ECAs and multilaterals in the capital stack for these projects, we find that sponsors and developers often see benefit and take comfort from government financiers being involved in the capital stack for these projects, particularly where there are cross-border elements to the projects and particularly where these projects are financed in unfamiliar markets. There are roles for government financiers to help to provide comfort in that kind of an environment. So in many ways, the participation of ECAs and the collaboration in these financing structures can help to solve some important problems in delivering the financing of these projects. And certainly by working together, as we like to do with our other ECA partners, where we share due diligence and risk frameworks and local market insights, certainly where it's appropriate, then we can play a catalytic role in advancing these clean energy partnerships across the region.
Thank you. And we talked a little bit about harmonization, policy standards. Mingcheng from SGTech, what steps do you think ASEAN could take to harmonize data governance, digital standards, to help build seamless cross-border grid connectivity from an off-taker point of view?
Right, thanks. I think ASEAN can broadly take two broad steps. I think one is on collaboration, the second is on data transparency. So I'll talk first a bit about the collaboration step. So I believe that ASEAN has already started to take important steps to move this along. I think this morning Minister Gan talked about the submarine cable framework, but I think more important, what I think is a more major milestone was a couple of weeks ago there was the ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement, or DEFA, that was discussed during the recent ASEAN Economic Community Council meeting. So that's under discussion, expected to sign, I think my understanding is 2026. It's also my understanding that this will be the first major region-wide digital economy agreement that will be signed worldwide per se. And one of the key objectives of that agreement would be to harmonize our standards and our definitions, so in a hope to promote interoperability among the ASEAN countries. So that's the first broad step. I think the second broad step that both government and the industries in ASEAN can take is to have explore more data transparency in the various countries' energy systems. I think we should encourage open data initiatives, to track various countries' energy consumption, the grid performance, what are the renewables being forecasted, and then to Mitesh also, there's a lot of these projects that are long-term. I think we also need to keep a close eye on that just to make sure we don't lose track of it. And then at the right time, engage the relevant project stakeholders to move this along. So all this will help to foster, I think, trust-building dialogue between not only the regulators, but also the project developers, the utility providers, as well as the off-takers, such as myself, to facilitate hopefully they can facilitate seamless cross-border grid connectivity. So that's my take on it.
Okay. So, I mean, SGTech has been quite instrumental in fostering tech partnerships. How can industry alliances like SGTech's initiatives serve as a blueprint for integrating digital and energy resilience across borders? Would you have any views on that?
Okay. So, I think energy resilience cannot be built in isolation. I think nowadays, technology networks such as the grid energy rely on partnerships per se. So, industry alliances such as SGTech can help to bring together technology partners, policymakers, and energy stakeholders to bridge the digital and energy priorities. I think in today's environment, geopolitical environment, as long as continue collaboration, that can help to provide some continuity beyond political cycles that's ongoing in the world per se. And also, I think there's been talk about, I also believe that public-private partnerships are essential. I think that regional power energy corridors can be stabilized when, the industry players commit to long-term clean energy procurement process. So we need to link digital growth with green energy demand, and that can help to create bankable projects from that perspective. So I think specific to SGTech, I'd like to highlight two initiatives that we have done. I think, as I mentioned just now, digital and energy systems are converging. My industry, the data center, is often used as a, we have been said that we consume a lot of energy, and that can actually form as an anchor for all these ongoing new renewable energy projects per se. So I think recently we collaborated with SIAS, the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore, to work on a joint paper, which was launched just now, to show how that we align standards and coordinated investments can help to strengthen such corridors. I think the second thing, which I talked about earlier, about data transparency. So earlier this year, also SGTech worked with Digital Planet, which is from the Fletcher School of Business in the US. So they have developed this burn-to-earn index, where try to link, for every GDP dollar, is there a corresponding CO2 emissions that is. So this will help to then, provide a framework for benchmarking, and then also would help then drive some discussions on how we can identify cross-border clean energy initiatives per se, and also help to build transparent benefits models. So as I said, all these shared data frameworks help to reduce risks and also provide common grounds for collaboration per se. So yeah.
Thank you, Mingcheng. We have a question from the audience, which actually is very suited for this panel. So I am going to just open it up to the panel and let you guys. The question is, if you could drive one strategic shift to future-proof ASEAN's energy ecosystem through partnerships, what would that be? Would anyone want to?
Look, I can go first. I think the projects are quite large. There's significant risk, long horizon. Risk sharing, appropriate risk sharing is the biggest thing in my view, where you have right backstop for the offtake risk. You have right kind of capital available to put procurement orders for long lead items. You have right kind of risk sharing for geopolitical risk, jurisdiction where you're passing through a cable or intermediate countries. So these are the kind of things, and if they're done rightly, a project can quickly come to realization.
Paul,
Yeah.
do you want to say?
Yeah, I agree on risk sharing that's important, but the same importance is actually benefit sharing. Just thinking about, let's say, all these neighbor countries to Singapore actually export their energy, green energy to Singapore, and Singapore then could develop all this data center and so on. And also later on, they might claim as well financial benefit out of it, and including the emission reduction benefit. So how this kind of benefit could be shared with those countries that provide the green energy to them. So together with the let's say, thinking about how the ownership of this kind of infrastructure could be discussed and regulated properly, harmonized among the countries, that would be one of the very important issues to be discussed. Thank you.
Any thoughts?
Maybe I'll add on. My response is probably a bit more tactical in nature. I think it would be more like to standardize broadly the grid transmission charges per se. I think that will help to...
That would be the benefit sharing things, yeah.
So I think that's more immediate to accelerate.
Yeah.
So it would help to provide a level playing field, not just for utility providers, but also for off-takers such as myself. Thanks.
I think from my perspective as a financier, I think there are well-established structures and risk profiles that capital requires for financing to flow. So the shifts towards that market standard risk profile, the adjustments in terms of policy settings, regulatory frameworks, and government support where it's required is certainly critical to ensuring that the frameworks are ready for that capital to flow. So anything that we can do to get to that end point, I think, is important.
Any last words, James? I know a lot of it is you already
all-
had research, yes.
There's been some very good points already.
We've run out of time, so just to wrap up, I think that we've realized that basically the cross-border energy corridors, I mean, it's no longer aspirational. They are, I think, essential for Asia's sustainable future. So technology feasibility has been demonstrated. Scaling up requires, I think, political will, regulatory harmonization, innovative financing. So with coordinated action, Asia can transform its energy landscape and can deliver economic growth and climate resilience simultaneously. So thank you to our panelists for all your views and from all your expert advice. And I hope we can continue this conversation beyond this session. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you to our panelists and moderator for that very engaging discussion. Can I please have you all gather at the front of the stage here for a group photo together? Excellent. Thank you once again. Thank you very, very much. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our Clean Energy Leaders Dialogue. Thank you so much for your support. Also, before you go, I just want to ask that you share your feedback in our ACES app. If you open the app, you will find a survey icon. Let us know what you think about the program so far. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, and your input. And now we look forward to seeing you at the Singapore IRENA High-Level Forum that will commence at 2 p.m. sharp right here in this room. May we invite everyone here to enjoy a lunch break now located opposite this ballroom. On behalf of the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore, I would like to thank all of you for joining us here today, and we'll see you later at 2 p.m. Thank you very much, and enjoy your lunch. Thank you.